Hey everybody, this is Jonathan, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for being willing to take part in this process as I am beginning the ministry project that will complete in many ways my doctoral program. And so the project will be an 8 to 10 week ministry project that will take place at Beale Memorial Baptist Church over the next few months. And so you'll be learning more about this and hearing more as we go along. The title of the project is very simple. It is called Equipping Beale Memorial Baptist Church in Tappahannock, Virginia for the Tides of Cultural Change. Let me say that again. This is the title of the project is Equipping Beale Memorial Baptist Church in Tappahannock, Virginia for the Tides of Cultural Change. We live in a world and in a culture that is changing very rapidly. Hey Eli, how are you?
Good.
All right, can you go away and stuff? I'm trying to make a video. You say hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
All right, go to the other room, please.
I'm trying to find out.
We live in a culture that's changing so rapidly. By the time that one grows up, the world is going to be potentially a very different place than it is right now. And for many of you watching this video, you may already realize that the world is already a very different place from when you were a kid. And so I think sometimes because we live in a small town, live in a rural community, feel like change doesn't impact us, that the changes that are happening in our society are things that are maybe in the big city or in places like Charlottesville in a university town where there are racial tensions and political tensions and all of that kind of stuff. Well, the reality is, in our small community here in Essex County, we experience many of the same things because if you have cable TV or if you have access to the internet, the reality is all of the stuff that's happening out in our culture impacts us because it's piped into the community that we live in, right? On devices like our phones and our computers. So I want us to explore as a church what our response as a Christian church should be to all of the rapid changes that we are seeing in our culture. You know, change is sometimes not a bad thing, and sometimes it is a bad thing, and many of the times it depends on your perspective. There's a book called The Catholic Manifesto on Rural Life that was written in the 1940s, and it was a book that was designed for pastors and priests who were in the Catholic tradition, who were going from urban seminaries where they were receiving training to be ministers to rural parishes where they would be in the middle of cornfields trying to pastor and living in small town communities. One of the first paragraphs in that book, there's a story that says if you are going to pastor in a rural area, here's what the book actually says. It says you may find that your parishioners are very suspicious of modern technology that has come from the city. And the technology and inventions that it lists that rural people might be suspicious of are things like the electric light bulb, the bathtub, running water, and even the toilet. Well, I'm betting that if you are watching this video, you have electric light bulbs, running water in your home, a bathtub, and a toilet. So the reality is, and it's kind of a funny thing to think about, but whether or not we realize it, cultural change and cultural shifts happen. And they may happen in some places at a very fast clip and at a fast pace. They may happen in other places like Tappahannock or Essex at a slower pace, but that change and those cultural shifts are always around us and they're always coming whether we realize it or not. You know, the word Tappahannock and the Rappahannock, the river that we are on, both of those words in one way or another mean the tide rises and falls. Tappahannock and Rappahannock are old Indian names. And what I want us to do over the next several weeks is to think about a lot of the shifts that we're seeing in our culture as a kind of tidal movement. Cultural shifts are like tides in many ways. They happen whether or not we want them to. We have very little control over some of the cultural shifts that are happening in our society. Sometimes the tide may rise, and it may rise so high that it encroaches on property and land, and it can seem like a danger when the tide is rising. There are times when the tide recedes, and it may recede so much that it exposes things that were not previously exposed. Sometimes it may expose trash. in junk in our lives or in our culture, sometimes it may expose hidden treasure that we didn't even know was there when the tide recedes. There are a number of ways that the tide is like the culture and the shifts in culture, both in a positive and a negative light. And so over the next several weeks as a church, I hope that we can explore these things together. I'm going to have a sermon series called Tides of Faith that is going to help explore through looking at the book of 1 Corinthians some of the cultural tides that Paul was experiencing in his day and how we may learn from that. On Wednesday night, in just a couple of weeks, we are going to study H. Richard Niebuhr's book, Christ and Culture. And we will study Niebuhr's book hand in hand with the Bible as we explore 5 different postures that the church has had toward the culture over the last 2,000 years. And you might find that there's one of those ways of relating to culture that is really near and dear to your heart and something that's very familiar to you. And you might find that there are ways of relating to culture that are not as familiar and maybe challenging and enlightening as to how we might respond to the world that we live in and all the change that we see around us in fresh and new ways. So I hope that you'll join us on Wednesday nights this coming month for the Christ and Culture series where we can explore these things together. My hope is that for all of us this will be a learning experience as we travel together through Scripture, as we think maybe a little more deeply than we normally do about our own values and the things that we hold dear, and as we consider also how our church might respond to all of the changes that we see around us. As a part of this ministry project for my DMin, which stands for Doctor of Ministry, I'm going to have a questionnaire. And if you're watching this video, you are probably in one of 2 sample groups for the questionnaire. The first sample of individuals for the questionnaire will be made up of our church council and deacons. So if you are on the church council and in a part of the deacon ministry, you are part of the first test group with the questionnaire. The second group will be made up of committed lay people in our church who are of different ages and different socioeconomic backgrounds and different racial backgrounds and family makeups, so that we can get a good test sample of the entire congregation and what the pulse of our church is when it comes to some of the changes that we are experiencing in our culture. When I talk about cultural changes, I'm not just referring to hot-button social issues. I'm referring to things that are actually under the surface of all of that are probably the real reason for why we're experiencing so much turmoil and division in our culture. So my prayer is that if you're in one of these test groups, that you'll be able to do the survey, that you'll be able to get it in a timely fashion, and that we will see how all of our answers and all of our values and perceptions kind of fit together as a church. We are a patchwork of different backgrounds and lives and experiences here at Beale Memorial Church, and so I'm excited to see what will come of the information that is gleaned from the questionnaire. Also, for both of the test groups, we're going to have an all-day gathering or a half-day gathering on a Saturday in about 4 weeks from now. And we're going to come together and we're going to explore on a more personal level than the first questionnaire was able to delve into what our actual experiences with church have been. Some of us in our past may have been wounded by church or by Christians in church or people who call themselves followers of God for one reason or another. Some of us may have wonderful stories to celebrate about how God has ministered to us through the ministries of Beale Memorial Church and through other churches, maybe that we grew up in our childhood. And so we are going to come together and share some of those stories and try to identify some common themes and threads that emerge in those narratives. And I hope that as a result of all of these conversations about our own personal stories and about how we perceive the change in our own culture, that we as the leaders of Beale Memorial Church will be able to find and to seek and to prayerfully discern what God's vision is for us as a church. I believe that God has wonderful and exciting days ahead for Beale Memorial Church, and I am excited and thrilled to be a part of this chapter in our church's rich and storied history. And I hope that you are too, and that you will get just as much as I will out of this process as we learn together and as we grow together as followers of Jesus Christ and as the church God is calling us to be. So, I'm going to end this video, and I just want to say thank you for your willingness to participate in my ministry project. The wonderful thing about a Doctor of Ministry program is that in the projects that we have to design to complete our program, we are able to seek the participation and the input of folks in our places of ministry service. And my place of ministry service is here at Beale Memorial Church, so I'm delighted that I get to journey through this part of my own life and my educational experience with you all. And my prayer is that we can learn from one another and that we can journey through this process and come out with some new perspective and some fresh insight from God's Spirit on the other side. Thank you so much for all of your support and for your willingness to be a part of one of these test samples. And I pray and I hope that God will lead us in the right directions as we discern and as we journey together over the next several weeks.